We're here on another episode of the Dreamer Comics podcast, and today I'm very lucky because I have my good friend here, Kyle Higgins.
I would say that is the most I've seen you talk with your hands ever.
I'm very Italian when I talk with my hands.
Are you? You're not Italian.
No, but my dad speaks Italian fluently, actually, so random fact.
So you have to ask him when you want it translated?
Exactly,
Or...
but you got to just show him the exact hand movements to get it right.
Does he only speak in Italian hand movements?
I feel like Italians, like in general, if you're speaking Italian, you have to have some sort of like hand movement.
I feel like you just angered most of the Italian community watching this.
I don't know.
I'm sorry, Italian Power Rangers. Daniele, I'm so sorry. My Italian partner in crime on Power Rangers.
Nice, yeah.
Did you know he's Italian?
I did not know he's Italian.
He's in Italy. I'm not sure where Walter is. He might be Italian too. Now I've offended Walter.
But it's they've been doing such an amazing job with the book.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have a copy of it right here, the 27th issue that just came out on Wednesday.
It did.
And what we're going to do is if people like the video, share it, and subscribe to the page, we're going to offer it away as a gift. So if you want to sign this for some of the fans.
Sure. Oh, you want me to sign it right now?
Yeah, sign it right now. Get the cover.
Man, normally people ask me questions first before they hit me up to sign something.
No, we need your signature as much as possible because we're going to forge checks later.
I mean, if you want checks to bounce, sure.
I love it. So this issue will be given away. It's available now.
That's the first one I've signed of that, actually.
Nice. So you can get it live from this show.
How is the microphone? How is this? Does it sound okay? All right.
So let's jump right into it. How did you get started in comics?
Well, I've always read comics since I was a kid, and I found them. Actually, I found them in reverse order from. I found them through superhero movies, but saying that in 2018 makes a lot of sense, but saying that in 1992 doesn't make as much sense because there wasn't the amount of content out there like we have today. I think specifically there was X-Men the Animated Series that I became a big fan of, and then Batman the Animated Series, certainly, and the Tim Burton Batman film, the 60s Batman show, old reruns of the Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Incredible Hulk from the 70s. And once in a while, like an old 70s rerun of the Japanese Spider-Man show, the Toei show. And then Donner's Superman. So watching those films, I started to gravitate towards these are characters in books that come out monthly. And I remember my friend in probably 95, childhood friend, showed me, because he read comics, and he showed me an issue of Spider-Man where it was Spider-Man and Peter Parker in the same issue. And I was like, that's impossible. Well, it was the beginning of the Clone Saga. And so I started buying issues then, while I was also making little, I guess you would call them fan films, but when you're 7, I mean, they feel very real, for things for Superman and Ninja Turtles, and I was also a huge Ninja Turtles fan, and Power Rangers. And so it just kind of became a little bit of a snake eating its tail. There wasn't the amount of live action or even animated material that I wanted. And so I started looking to other mediums for the same type of storytelling with the same type of characters, I should say. And that led me to comics, and my grocery store had them, so I would pick them up. Kmart had them, but they were always late. They never came out, you didn't know when they were going to show up at Kmart, for example. So it was always a few months behind. And at that time, trying to read Spider-Man monthly was impossible because it was jumping between 4 titles for the clone stuff. So it was challenging, and then probably 96, 97, somewhere in there, I started going to a comic book store, a direct market store. And it was around that time that the Nightwing series launched with Chuck Dixon and Scott McDaniel. And the numbering was so low that I was able to jump in at it's either issue 14 or 16. I can never remember which. I think it was 16. And I was able to go back and find all the previous issues And so that became my first monthly book that I bought every single month and read every issue of, basically. And that was my favorite character. I didn't know he had become Nightwing until because in the Batman the animated series, he's still Robin. Dick Grayson is Robin. And I've told the story before, but like the DC Marvel crossover miniseries, in it there was an issue where I think it's the first issue where like Nightwing and Gambit are fighting, and the captions are like Nightwing, formerly he's Dick Grayson, formerly Robin. I was like, what? He grew up, like he's not Robin anymore? Like, does anyone else know about this? And it had happened in '85, but I was new to the game. And so I was just really attracted to that character and to that idea of getting out from under someone's shadow and trying to forge your own legacy. And at DC, a lot of those characters are really kind of built on, I don't want to say archetypes, but they're designed as gods. You didn't see a lot of personal kind of struggle with the characters in the way that you did at Marvel, where the characters are all kind of really built on flaws. And the idea of a kid having to grow up and find his own path in life and say goodbye to not only a life but a career path, and like get out from under someone else's mantle, and that's always going to loom. That felt very loaded to me even as a kid, and it was something that really resonated for me. And it actually felt the most like a Marvel book to me, or a Marvel character, I should say. And I think that's why I ended up gravitating towards them.
But your first work in comics was actually at Marvel, is that right?
Mm-hmm. I started at Marvel, yeah.
So what was the first series you did there?
Well, the first series I did was I've never done an ongoing series at Marvel. The first series was a Supreme Power miniseries that I got that kind of, I don't want to say willed into existence, but no one was clamoring internally for a Supreme Power series. It was just it was a world that I really, really liked that Straczynski had built out based on the original Grunwald Squadron Supreme. It was like a reimagining of that. And so I was like, hey, I emailed Tom Brevoort and I was like, could there be something here? And he thought there could still be some name cachet with Supreme Power, and I could do something. So that was my first multi-issue book. But before that, I had landed a one-shot of Captain America. And it was a World War II story that I co-wrote with Alex Siegel. And it was Steve wakes up and he's in a prisoner of war camp in Nazi Germany, and the Germans don't know that he's Captain America. So he has to, he could break out himself easily, but he's not going to leave all these other soldiers behind. So he has to liberate the camp as well. So it kind of becomes a bit of the Great Escape with Steve Rogers. And then from there, I was offered an Avengers one-shot, which was going to be kind of a slight reimagining of the Vision. And again, I asked Alec to write that with me. And then we had a series of backups, and I don't even remember what they were for. They might have been for Young Avengers, and they ended up getting killed just because of a crossover, and there just wasn't slot for them. So they to make up for that, they offered us a backup within Ed Brubaker's Captain America run, which was awesome. I think I still get like some royalties on that, like to this day.
Wow.
I mean, not much, like a couple bucks, but like they knew it was gonna. I've never asked them about it, but it felt like it was like a, hey, sorry your other thing didn't work or didn't go. Here's something in a bigger book, And then I started talking to Mike Martz at DC, and when I got the Supreme Power miniseries, I was also doing a little one-shot character-focused backups at DC for the Night Runner, creating the French Algerian kind of Batman of Paris. And that led to Gates of Gotham, which was a miniseries that I did. And I was writing Supreme Power and Gates of Gotham at the same time. And then while I was doing both of those, having never written a miniseries before, I was now writing two concurrently and making the same mistakes on both, right? Then DC offered me Deathstroke, and I'd never written an ongoing. So now I was writing two minis and an ongoing, not knowing how to do either. And And then they offered me Nightwing. So again, it was like 2 minis, 2 ongoings, having never written a mini or an ongoing, and making many mistakes across.
You learn as you go, though. You know, it's
well, you learn as you go, or you sink your career. I mean, that's the reality.
Yeah.
Like, and I remember there was a moment where I was back in Illinois and staying at my parents' house after just coming back from New York, where they had offered me Nightwing, and I almost had a mental like breakdown. Like, it was because I owed so many pages, and I was late on Supreme Power. I was late on Gates of Gotham. It was just very overwhelming. Plus, Deathstroke and Nightwing were both part of the New 52, so there was tons of pressure on those books and really bright spotlights on them, especially on Nightwing.
Yeah.
And everything I did was under a microscope with editorial, and it was just a really hard environment to work in. And it wasn't I wouldn't recommend it starting out.
Yeah,
you know?
4 books at the same time is tough.
4 books, and in that climate.
Yeah.
That was in 2011. Yeah.
With pressure taken on you all the time, it's like a ticking clock that these books have to get turned in monthly, or else they're going to lose sales.
That's comics in general. I mean, it's not even that they'll lose sales; it's you'll lose your job.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real fine line between, you know, art and commerce, and the great thing about comics is that they are monthly, and that the print deadline is a ship date. So something's got to go all the time, and we fight with this. Not fight, but we have this challenge on something like Power Rangers, where it's got to go to the printer. You know.
Yep.
And
absolutely.
There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen that want to weigh in, and people at Boom, people at Saban. And everyone weighs in with the absolute best of intentions, but at the end of the day, it's like
there's a lot.
This
30 days.
has got to go, guys.
Yeah.
This has got to go to print, and we're all killing ourselves to get it
to
out
make
the
sure
door.
it's done, and the artist and everything, it has to wait on you. And if they're coming back with feedback, it's always a constant back and forth and juggling it. So, how did you get into storytelling? Like, what was your process learning to write? Like, where do you feel like you learned how to write?
That's a good question. I don't know. I never wanted to be a writer. I never thought I could write. It was never something I really wanted to do. I guess looking back, always written, but it was so that I would have material to direct, even as a 7-year-old. And then I would write little kind of superhero stories or Power Ranger stories when I was probably 8 years old. And then I remember in 4th grade, I wrote a little story, and people in class, I haven't thought about it in years. I've never told this before, but I wrote a little story as a part of like an English assignment, I think, or it was something like that. And people laughed at it and laughed at me. And it was kind of like an adventure thing, like at an amusement park. And I feel like that hurt. I don't remember, but I feel like I'm having kind of like a sense memory. Like, I feel like it kind of like hurt. And so I didn't really do it very much, but I was always daydreaming about stuff. And then in 8th grade, I tried again. I wrote something as a part of a project. And again, it didn't really go over that well. It was fine. I thought it was cool. It was kind of a little like vigilante superhero thing with teenagers. And then it wasn't until, I guess freshman year, or no, not freshman year. It was during high school when I decided I wanted to make movies and I wanted to be a director that I started probably end of junior year or in senior year, somewhere in there. I finally decided oh, no, I could do that. I'm going to write something. I'm going to write a short film to shoot. I just didn't feel like I was ready. And part of it was this is such a beginner thing. I was well, I don't know enough about the way the world works. I don't have enough life experience to write. I mean, that's absolutely true, but the key is to not write about stuff that you don't know, you know? So around that time, junior, senior year, I was I'm going to make a short film. And so I wrote a script for it. I remember letting someone read it in high school, during band practice, and they didn't like it and they didn't get it. And then I let my AP English teacher read it while I was taking a test, and I went to turn in the test, and he had read it. It was only 14 pages. And he's like, "This is fantastic." I was like, really? And he's like, this is great. And that meant a ton, you know?
Of course.
And then I started shooting that short film. I don't think I ever finished it, but Alec Siegel was in it. Alec actually is the one who taught me how to write screenplay form. Like senior year of high school, our mutual friend Jana Tropper, who she's probably not watching this, but she'll give me endless shit now that I've mentioned her in a good way. She introduced us because she's like, hey, you should write more, because she always has written. And she's like, and I was like, well, I really kind of want to write screenplay stuff. I don't really know how. And she's like, oh, here, and she like AOL instant messaged Alec, because that's what year this was. And then he and I started talking, and he like reformatted stuff for me. And I was like, oh, that's how you do it. And then when I went to college, I went to the University of Iowa, and freshman year, I took a class called Rhetoric that all of the incoming freshmen had to take. And it was basically like, it wasn't like an English 101, but it was kind of it was very much a thought-provoking class about forms of storytelling, about societal kind of expectations and kind of analysis of different things. And it was just kind of like a catch-all. But the guy who taught it was from LA, and he was a member of something called the Iowa Writers Workshop, which I didn't know what it was. It turns out it's the best writing school in the country.
Oh, wow.
It's statistically harder to get into. It's a grad program. It's statistically harder to get into than Harvard Business. So I knew very early on at Iowa I wanted to transfer to somewhere in Southern California for film school, because I knew Iowa wasn't the right fit for me for filmmaking. But I wasn't going to be able to for at least a semester, but it ended up being I ended up staying for my freshman and sophomore year in full at Iowa. So during my sophomore year, I remember thinking like, well, what can I do here that is advantageous to what I want to do career-wise? And I remembered that rhetoric class and the guy in the Iowa Writers Workshop, et cetera. And I was like, well, I'm going to take a creative writing class, because he had told me like all the creative writing classes are taught by members of the Writers Workshop, basically the grad students who are in the program. So it's basically like TAing, right? But they teach us. I was like, well, I'll do that. And so I took a creative writing class with a woman named Tracy Manister, who's a novelist now. She lives out up in Portland with her family, or her family, with her husband and kids, that family, not with her parents. You know. And one of my best friends, Justin Pisecki, took this class with me as well. And that was the first experience where I wrote prose, and I spent a ton of time on it. And it was kind of a high concept-y idea, and it went over really well. And then some people shit on it, but the initial response was so positive that I was like, it felt
works.
Yeah, it felt constructive. It was kind of the equivalent of when you hear comedians talking about getting that first laugh ever on stage. It was kind of that for me. I was like, oh. And so I always just kind of like filed it away as something like, well, if I want to direct and I want to make movies, like
I need material.
I should be able to do this. So when I transferred to Chapman, actually Justin transferred to NYU and I transferred to Chapman because USC turned us both down. And he and I stayed in touch, and he is an incredible writer. He's so incredible that, super fast forward for a second, he just won the Nickel Fellowship, which is the most prestigious screenwriting award grant in the world.
Wow.
So he was one of, I think, like 4 nickel winners last year. And he's out here now. So it's funny how things kind of circle back, you know. But I transferred to Chapman, and in order to get into the film school, I had to write, because I transferred internally. I transferred to Chapman for graphic design because they wouldn't let me in for film. And then while I was there, I needed to transfer internally into the film school, and I had to write a prompt. I had to write a short story. And so I wrote this short story about a little idea I had about a superhero labor union. And it was like a little 3-page story, and it was more of a comedy piece than anything else, or a satire, and turned that in, and I ended up getting into the film school. And then I decided very early on that I was going to do my thesis film 3 years later of that idea, but in a more serious, grounded way. And while I was at film school, it just became clear. It was like every time I had a project, it was like, well, I'll just write it. I mean, because I kind of felt like the people I could get to write it, I either felt like, well, I could do what they can do, or I can do it better in some cases. It's like, well, I'll just write it.
You know what you want, especially, you know.
But again, I didn't think of myself as a writer, and in a lot of ways, I mean, I do now, but for a long time, I didn't. And there are some days I absolutely don't. Still, it's just weird that it's the only way that I have made a living now for 8 years.
Wow.
But it's still like mentally.
Yeah.
There's a hang up there for me, you know.
And that idea ended up turning into Cowl. Mm-hmm. And you have a copy of Cowl with you today, right?
I do. For those who don't know, Cowl was my first image book. And again, it's about a superhero labor union, but whereas the story I wrote to get into Chapman was more of a comedy piece, this is very grounded. It takes place in 1960s Chicago. So it's as much about the transition, one of the greatest or biggest transitions in our country's history, as it is about, Chicago politics and history, as it is about the transition from the golden age of superheroes to like the silver age of heroes in the Marvel universe. So there's kind of all of that swirling around with it. And it's based on the thesis film I did, The League. And it was that film that got Joe Quesada's attention, which is how I started pitching to Marvel right out of college, actually, in the first place.
Wow. And so what's your process like when you write? Like how do you...
Oh, God.
What's the... I mean, you're someone I know very well, so I know you talk a lot of stories through. I know that you endlessly think about stories, and you're like, does this work? What if we try it this way? And what's the emotional arc for the character?
I'm very obsessive about the way in on an idea and how to build something so that it gives you the most emotional resonance. It gives the premise the most emotional resonance possible. And when you're constructing something, I tend to do a lot of world building, and I tend to do a lot of kind of high concept stuff. So when you're kind of constructing the rules, it's really like it's like a tumbler lock. Like you have to get each decision you make is a different pin, and that you're putting into a different position. And if one pin is in the wrong position, the lock won't open. But if you get each pin properly situated, and again, it can be a handful of decisions, it can be dozens, it can be 100 decisions, just on the rules of the world, right? And finding that is very, very hard.
Of course.
But that's what I'm most obsessive about. And all of those decisions include the characters that are going to explore this world and how their arcs and how their arcs inform the world and take it full advantage of the premise and the world. I do talk stuff through a lot. Yeah, at some point once I started writing professionally, I stopped really daydreaming. Like it's weird. I don't think about stories when I'm not working on a story. When I say working on a story, either typing, like at the keyboard, like with headphones on, like blinders on, working longhand in a notebook, or talking about it with someone, another writer, just to bounce stuff. If I'm not doing one of those three things, my brain is thinking about the fact that I have to write a story, and it's stressing about like the anxiety of the fact that I'm gonna have to write a story or figure out a story, but it's not sitting there doing any helpful things for me. Like it's not sitting there thinking about story stuff, which is really annoying because I would be way more efficient, but probably a little less pleasant to be around, which I know is startling to think of me being even less pleasant to be around.
Oh, then that's tough. Mm-hmm. So wanted to just take a quick break, talk about some of the comments that are coming in. A lot of people are loving Hyperforce. So Stephanie Turner is talking about Hyperforce. Liam Murphy says, hey Kyle, from the Hypermode RPG mods, hashtag Hyperforce. And we have a lot of people who are Judith Damin, and she's proud of the encouraging high school teacher who actually gave you that first kind of that first word of encouragement.
I should apologize to everyone. I have a cold as well, so I'm like I'm like coughing into the microphone here.
I think you have that sexy voice now.
I do. I've been aware of that.
And so
JJ over there has been like shooting me looks the whole time. Like I can tell he's almost a married man, but not yet.
not yet. He's still free enough to have some fun. So we are going to remind people that I'm Omar Spahi, and I'm here with Kyle Higgins, and we are going to have Kyle sign away a copy of the graphic novel.
But you haven't given that one away yet.
Oh, we're going to give them all away.
But so are we doing tiered signings?
We're doing
signing
tiered,
like one at a time.
We're signing one at a time.
Okay.
We're gonna get your wrist a workout from all the signing you're doing. And
why don't I just sign? You don't want me to just sign them all at once?
You can.
Well, whatever you want.
Yeah.
It's your podcast, man. I'm just a guest.
I'm just. I just want people to see the books and check it out as they go.
Oh, I see.
So we have
most of those comments are related to Power Rangers.
Yeah.
In case you couldn't tell.
A lot of people love Power Rangers, so
they do.
Let's talk about Power Rangers.
Sure. What do you want to know? What do you want to talk about?
All right. How does Shattered Grid end? Just kidding. How did you come to work on Power Rangers?
Snipers are dialing me in right now.
How did you come to work on Power Rangers? I know you grew up like me, a huge fan of Power Rangers. So it's a trip.
I was for a certain amount of time, but it wasn't that long actually. I saw it when it aired. The Pudgy Pig episode, Food Fight, was actually the first episode that aired in the U.S. I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. Oh, Anthony Birch, who wrote a story in the annual set, or the Shattered Grid annual that explored the RPM world. We were talking about like the first episode we saw, and we both saw the Pudgy Pig episode first. I was like, oh, that's weird, because I feel like I came onto it a little later. He goes, no. He's like, that's the first episode that aired on a Saturday morning on Fox Kids, which makes a ton of sense if that's true. I haven't looked it up, but I feel like that's right. So I saw it from the very beginning, and it became massively popular at my school very quickly, as I'm sure it did
mine
yours.
as well.
But I was at the tail end of the age range. So you were right in the sweet spot.
I was right in the sweet spot. I stayed through it for pretty much till Turbo. I think that's when I was on it for years.
So I was 8 when it aired, and it was really popular for like 6 months at my school, and then became really unpopular pretty fast after that. Or maybe it was a little longer than that. But everyone younger than me was all about it for much longer. So I stayed through Tommy becoming the White Ranger, and then I had kind of a passing familiarity with what was going on through Zeo, and then like I came back for like the Turbo movie. I think I watched that, but then after that, I remember being at a friend's house and be like, wait, they're in space now? Like who are all these people? You know? But it was years later when I started doing comic conventions as a writer that I noticed how many Power Rangers cosplayers there were. And people would come up to my table, and I would ask them about it. And like people like my age or a little younger, and be like, well, "What? So like, what's the deal? Like, are you still you're a big Power Rangers fan?" And I started to realize that the fandom was huge, and it was still out there, and the show was still on the air. I knew the show was still on the air. Actually, I take that back. And at one point in college, Alec and I were living together down in Orange at Chapman, because he moved out to Southern California when I made the league, and he actually wrote it with me. And I remember we were sharing this apartment, and there was like one night I was up till like 2 a.m. like watching YouTube videos from like Power Morphicon, I think, of these actors like talking like where are they now kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm fascinated. Like I want to know like what's the story with Power Rangers, and just falling down Wikipedia rabbit holes and things like that. So it wasn't so that's all just kind of background for when I got the book. Well, I've told the story before, but the really quick version is that in 2012, Bryce Carlson, who's a managing editor at Boom, he and I were G-chatting, and Bryce and I are really good friends, and we actually went to Chapman together but didn't know each other. We met like 6 months after Chapman. And so we were G-chatting, and I said to him, I was like, you know what Boom should do? they should do a Power Rangers. They should get the Power Rangers license because like that book could be really sick. Like you do it as a modern superhero book, and there's no budget, and you can really take advantage of and really build out like the mythology in ways that they couldn't on the show with pre-existing footage and things like that. And he's like, funny you say that. He's like, it's come up. Like we've talked about it. And so we like kind of went back and forth on this for a few minutes. I was writing Nightwing at the time, so this would have been 2012. And then Paper Cuts announced they got the license, and I remember thinking like, oh, well, that's I mean, cool for Paper Cuts, but that's a bummer because
Boom
that would have been fun. But I didn't know how serious Boom was about it or anything. Fast forward to 2015, and all of a sudden, this press release goes out with these incredible single images from Goni Montes of the Power Ranger helmets and each Ranger holding the helmet.
I mean, they might be even here in the
They might be in the back of the trade. And
like something like this, like the
yeah, so those all went out, and it was announcing that Boom had acquired the license, and it was like, oh man, just from those images alone, you knew like, oh, this could be a hot series. Really hip, and I knew everyone at Boom socially for years, and so I knew they would really get behind something like this, like on the marketing side, because you really need that for a book like this, especially to try to compete with Big Two superhero stuff. And so I emailed Bryce and I was like, hey man, who do I got to kill to write a pitch for a backup? Because I figured they already had their team locked in. And he wrote back and he's like, funny enough, he's like, we're looking for a main writer and your name's come up. And he's like, I was like, well, we chatted about this back in 2012. He's like, I know, that's what I've been telling people. So I had a little window in my schedule before we were going to go shoot the Shadow Hours.
Yep.
And so I remember being in Wisconsin and going at like a cabin with like family friends and stuff.
Probably at a Packers game, just rooting on the Packers.
Never. I'm going to leave now. You had to take it there. I'm a diehard Chicago Bears fan, for anyone who doesn't know, and Omar he's not a fair weather Packers fan, he's an out-of-state Packers fan.
That's fair.
You never lived in Wisconsin?
I've never lived in Wisconsin.
Was it just Brett Favre growing
No,
up?
it was my roommate in college. He got me into football, and so he was a Brett Favre fan, and so I grew up like just in the beginning of the Rodgers era, getting into football, and that's how I kind of got into it from there.
A quick tangent I always think about when the Bears are playing the Packers is we both lived on the west side.
Yeah.
Well, you still live over there, but like I think we were both living in Brentwood at the time. And you already know the story.
I already know the story.
And there was a Monday night game, and my buddy Riley, who I've watched every Bears game with out here since college, he and I were sitting outside at Fresh Brothers down in Brentwood, eating a pizza, watching Jay Cutler throw like 4 interceptions.
Classic Jays. Classic.
And it was a season where they traded for Brandon Marshall. So they had a pretty legit team that year. And I was so pissed. And Omar and one of your friends walked by.
And I had a Packer shirt on.
And you had a Packer shirt on. And I was just like, keep walking. I don't even want to see you. I don't want to talk to you.
I remember. And I was like, all right, man. Cool story, man. I remember that.
Oh, but so I was in Wisconsin. I wrote this pitch, and I remember showing it to James Tynan, and he thought it was really cool. And he was like, Boom usually likes to do 4-issue arcs. You may want to think about that. I was like, oh, that's smart. So I kind of reconfigured it for that. And basically, it pitched out, here's how I would do the book. And I told them when I turned it in, I was like, if you guys like this and you're interested in this direction, like, sweet. If you're not, or Saban's not, then I'm not the guy for the job. Like, this is how I would do it. This is what I think it should be. And that's kind of like, it's anything kind of other than this is a little bit of a non-starter for me from an interest level. And when I say non-starter, I mean like anything that's like diametrically different. Like, if they had said like
change this small detail, then it would.
If they had said we want this to be set in the 1990s and to fill in between episodes, stories in between episodes, and fill in holes in continuity, I would have said no thanks. And I mean, like, there is a little bit of that in the book, like just from the standpoint of like, we're technically in continuity, but it's a little bit more of like a remix. Like, you got to kind of squint because it like takes place in 2017 or 2016 or whatever. It takes place modern day. So it can't be the 90s, and they have cell phones and things like that. But like big story beats, we still have to like hit, or maybe if not hit, we have to be aware of and kind of work within. So there is an aspect of that a little bit, but obviously we've done some crazy stuff here.
So the Power Rangers going to be using Twitter anytime soon and getting on there and
Ryan just wrote a line in the Free Comic Book Day issue where Kim is asking Trini if Kim is telling Trini that there's a guy interested in her, and Kim's like, "Should I swipe right on that for you?" And it was like, it threw when I first read it, I was like, "Oh, that's so cool!" Like, I mean, they're using like a modern dating terminology to refer to someone, not on an app, but in real life. And I haven't done anything with Twitter. I did a YouTube channel, Bulk and Skulls.
I remember that. Yeah, that was in the first few episodes.
I mean, the book is kind of like turned into this whole other thing with this, Go-Go is very much now like very grounded about their lives, and the Mighty Morphin book is much more of like the big cosmic kind of adventures now. So all the character stuff I do is emotionally grounded, but it's not really grounded in like Angel Grove anymore, just because the scope has gotten so big, especially with leading up to and now Shattered Grid.
So let's talk about Shattered Grid. Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
I can't really talk very much about it.
I mean,
you can try.
You can
try.
So where did you you came up with the idea for this short film, and what was the process for doing that thing?
I feel like everyone else here should jump in on this. Behind the scenes here, the team live streaming this is actually the production company and the producing team that did Shattered Grid with me. The trailer with me.
JJ and Flotron and Ramon are all here, and
Hannah. Hannah was on it too.
Hannah was on it too?
Yeah, I knew the event was coming up. Jason had wanted to do something with Lord Draken. He'd been asking me about it for a while. I was like, dude, we should do something with Lord Draken. We should shoot Lord Draken. Like, we can get a suit. Like, we can do something with Lord Draken. I kept thinking, like, nah, I don't really want to. I don't want to do a fan film. I don't want to do, I don't know. I don't like that stuff really. Jason had done a bunch of stuff as the Green Ranger and with Aaron, Shanky, and Bat in the Sun. And I was like, I don't really, that's just not really what I want to do. And then I had an idea with Shattered Grid starting out about doing basically a short film of Lord Draken that is not only, I mean, it's technically a promo for the book and for the event, but it was really designed in my mind to be like a really cool celebration of 25 years of Power Rangers, because this is the anniversary. So I pitched it to Jason, and he was like immediately, he's like, fuck yeah. He's like, let's do it. Like, let's do it. We'll hook it up. I was like, well, I got to talk to people about this, like, because I can't.
There's so many
just
moving
go
parts.
do this. Yeah. So I reached out to our partners at Saban. I reached out to Boom, and we managed. They were really supportive, and we managed to bring it all together. And from the time that we shot it to the time that it went online was less than a month.
Wow.
So all
that's
those
incredible.
Every
VFX.
shot in there is a visual effects shot, and that's a testament to Legion VFX, who did all of our VFX work. We built that Draken throne room set.
Came out amazing.
Mm-hmm, thanks. All the costumes were by Aniki, who I messed up. I realized the other day, like, he's not credited, or the company's not credited in the final credit title card. But Aniki did all the suits, and Jason delivered a really kick-ass, subtle, nuanced performance, even in just a couple lines, and it really kind of blew up. I mean, I think at this point it's done like across platforms. It's done about like 13 to 14 million views.
Wow. That's past viral. I mean,
it was a really cool. It was a cool reaction. And
then the book sales have kind of like gone up. Do you think this has played into the book sales kind of jumping in and getting people more interested if they didn't know about the series, kind of learning about the series through this kind of live action almost celebration?
Yeah, there was an interesting reaction that I noticed. A lot of people thought that it was a trailer for like a series or for a film or like a Netflix series or something like that. And we made it clear that it was for the book, but I didn't embed any sort of download link when we posted the film on Jason's YouTube channel. I don't know that there actually was a download link yet, because this came out, or like a, not download link, but like a Comixology link or something. Like, buy the book digitally. But I have heard from a lot of retailers that they've run it in their store.
Yeah.
And that's done, like, it's a
Wonders.
really cool piece to run. Like, it's very high production value, you know, like we kind of went all out in making it. And selfishly for me, like, as a director, like, I was going to be, you know, we're going to take the Shadow Hours public a few days after this.
Yep.
So I looked at it as a fantastic opportunity to do something with,
Cross promotion.
and also something with branded IP. The Shadow Hours is a film that Omar executive produced, that I wrote and directed, and that JJ produced as well. And it's the first thing that I had directed in a couple years, since The League, really. And it's an original thing. It's really a proof of concept for a feature that, you know, I finally finished writing. But doing something like a Power Rangers promo in a dark, moody, kind of evocative, you know, take was an opportunity to do something with branded IP, you know, something that wasn't original, wasn't my own, but it's my kind of take on it. And by doing it officially with Saban and with Boom, it's just different muscles, you know. Mm-hmm. And just as a director, I looked at it as like, well, this would be a great piece, a great showpiece. Yep. In addition to things like Shadow Hours and The League and anything else I shoot going forward.
Yeah, and it came out awesome. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I'm partial to Shadow Hours because I was.
It's yours, yeah.
I was involved in it.
Or ours, I should say.
Yeah, it is. It is. We love it, and so you know, Eric Maw here says he just got his copies of 26 and 27 in the mail, and he can't wait to read them.
Oh, sweet.
And Jody Johnston may have said something, but I cannot talk about it because it may include a spoiler to the to actually what's happening in the story. So I'm not going to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
But
put the marker down.
And so people are asking about the Hyperforce. Are we going to see Hyperforce in the Shattered Grid kind of timeline?
Oh, in the book?
In the book, they want to see Hyperforce.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, we're doing. Think about it. We're doing a live stream on the internet, and the internet is the bastion of Hyperforce. So of course, there's going to be a lot of questions about it. Yeah, I would say keep reading Shattered Grid. I mean,
and figure it out as it goes along.
I mean, read the book, and they're either going to be in it or they're not.
Yep.
So, I mean, you'll find out.
Yeah.
But I will say that
it's great to have that kind of support, though, from the fans asking these questions.
Yeah.
And
well, and those Hyperforce episodes that I was a part of, you know, I helped them design the narrative for that. Less the specific plotting of it and more the world and how to make it fit within my issues of my side of the event story. Yeah, the finale of that has the Hyperforce Rangers getting a call and heading off. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the event, is I guess what I would say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anything's possible.
Anything is possible. Well, not anything, because there's only 20 pages per issue, but a lot of things are possible.
Well, now I wanted to switch gears a second and talk about your other book that came out this Wednesday.
Yeah, The Dead Hand.
The Dead Hand.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that don't know, I'm Omar Spahi, and this is writer Kyle Higgins. Mm-hmm. And he is the creator of The Dead Hand, or should I say creator, co-creator?
I guess co-creator. I mean, it's Stephen Mooney, Jordy Belair, Clayton Cowles, and I do this book. And it is an end of the Cold War spy thriller about doomsday weapons that the Soviet Union built during the Cold War and the reverberations that they have today as this small town. I don't want to spoil it, but this small town has this very like all-American small town, mountain town, has this huge secret that is connected to some of these weapons and the end of the Cold War and the last mission of the Cold War, Operation Dead Hand. And the name, the Dead Hand, refers to an autonomous doomsday weapons system that the Soviets never actually built, but flirted with. They built a semi-autonomous system called Perimeter, which we didn't learn about till 1993, but it was designed to guarantee a retaliatory strike on the United States, even in the event of the Kremlin being totally decapitated.
Wow. That's scary.
Mm-hmm. It was like
total mutual destruction, assured mutual destruction.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's scary. That's a scary concept.
So that's coming out right now, and it's got killer art from Steven and Jordy. Here let me find some cool pages, stuff like this.
Gorgeous.
Steven doing his best, like Barry Windsor Smith here, and then this killer double page spread.
I love it. He has almost a superhero kind of vibe to it, like secret agent mixed with superhero, kind of with that costume and that look.
It's very like we say it's very like Bond mixed with Metal Gear Solid, mixed with like some Jean Le Carre novels. So it's definitely stylized historical, stylized heightened historical fiction.
So when you're making comics, who have people who have been your inspiration in comic books, who you've kind of like looked up to or admired whenever you were making comic books or getting into the medium? Who were people who were kind of your inspiration in comic books?
Well, as a kid, like I said, the Nightwing series was huge for me. And so I kind of read everything that Chuck Dixon did. And at that time, he was basically running the Bat line. So I was a huge fan of Robin, huge fan of Nightwing, his Birds of Prey. And through those books and the rise and the accessibility of the internet, I was able to I shouldn't say I was able to. I found, like, he had a presence back then and online and on a website, and he would post some of his scripts. But more importantly, I remember him doing posts about just his approach to writing and certain style choices and things like that. And he's the one, like, I learned who Elmer Leonard was through one of Chuck Dixon's blogs.
For those that don't know, who is Elmer Leonard?
Well, Elmer Leonard is a very prolific writer who he did hundreds of westerns, western stories. He did a lot of crime fiction. He's had there have been movies that have been made out of his stuff. Like Justify is based on an Elmer Leonard.
Oh wow!
Either book or series of books, I can't remember. Out of Sight is based on an Elmer Leonard book. Jackie Brown is actually based on an Elmer Leonard, either book or story. I think book. I think it's Rum something. It's Rum something or other. So he has a very kind of terse style, and it's like it's very to the point. It's not super flowery. He's amazing with language, but it's just very like, it fits in what we think of when we think of like crime kind of fiction writing, kind of noir without being like Raymond Chandler. I guess that makes sense. Like I said, it's a much more stripped down kind of terse approach. So that's actually where I get a lot of my style from when it comes to like voiceover, which I hate writing.
Yep.
Hate it. I'm working on an outline for a new kind of secret book right now, and I'm doing everything humanly possible to avoid doing first person narration. Like in the way that I'm constructing the book, I'm like, can I
just talk about everything instead of doing any sort of narration? Just like
No.
characters talk about it, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's much more like, can I bring in other characters so it's more not an ensemble, but like there are some people to like riff off of, because like it totally could and maybe should be first person narrated, what this project I'm doing, but I really don't want to, and I'm just over it. I don't feel like I'm very good at it. It takes me so long to do. And because I think the narration has to be, if you're going to do first person narration, it has to be informative to things that aren't immediately clear on the page, or it needs to run counter to what you're seeing on the page. And so it's the juxtaposition of the imagery and the line and the placement of the caption. It's just very, I have very strong opinions on narration. Whereas, you know, I picked up a book the other day, a new book, monthly. I'm not gonna say what it was or who did it, but like I was flipping through it and it's like, oh God, I'm bored out of my mind. It's the most like cliched, canned first person narration in a
You already know what to expect, and you already know what it is, and
and it's just like I'm not learning anything new. It's not about the story or in the story, and there's no style to it. There's no it's just like canned phrases that you or turns of phrase that you see and hear all over the place. So anyway, so Chuck Dixon back in the 90s. Brubaker, Rucka, Brian K. Vaughan, Jeff Johns was big for me, especially for superhero stuff.
yeah, me too.
A lot of Power Rangers I could point to as like being very, like what I do on Power Rangers being very influenced by, you know, Jeff's work on Green Lantern, things like that. Just like from a sense of like huge scope and mythology and I mean, you know, he's very good at that. Who else? Bendis. Bendis was huge for me.
Yeah.
Ultimate Spider-Man was a really seminal book for me in high school. And
It was done so well.
yeah.
The art, the storytelling, like Bendis just nailed that voice for Peter Parker and just
Right.
made it got like its own original take. I felt like I could get into it from the beginning, so I didn't get in like in the middle of a clone saga
Right.
and then get completely lost. And then that I felt like was so valuable, and so I was able to like pick up the trades or pick up the single issues and just kind of feel like I'm getting it.
And at that time there was also Ultimate X-Men that Miller and Adam Kubert were doing, and that blew my mind for very different reasons than Ultimate Spider-Man. Like the Ultimate X-Men stuff was like a class in like, here's how you take something, you know, anywhere. Like this isn't what you think it's gonna be, and like there were big twists and turns, and
Just because you think you know it doesn't mean that it's that way, or it's
yeah, exactly.
you
Like
can
I
run with
remember
it.
like Cyclops defecting to Magneto's side in
remember
like
that.
issue 6, and I remember
Yeah.
I was like in San Francisco on like a school field trip, and we like ran off to a comic store because I was telling people about this book, this Ultimate X-Men book, and like we found the new issue, and I was like, oh my God, like yeah, it was just like stuff like that could happen, you know, because it was a new take on kind of the mythology and the concept. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously the big names are really influential, and that's why they're big names.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman. I actually didn't read. I'm a big Neil Gaiman fan, but I didn't find his comics until years and years later. I actually started with his novels, but I mean, Sandman is you know, obviously seminal work.
Yeah, I've only read the first volume of that.
It takes a little while. You can see him figuring out how to write comics, and you can see him figuring out kind of his voice. Things really start to, like the first issue that really clicks for me is when he goes to hell, and he talks his way out. When Dream goes to hell, and then he has to talk his way out of hell. It's pretty great. It's very clever.
I got to go back and read that whole series.
I think that's issue 6 actually.
And so we also are giving away issues today of your book that has actually just come to trade.
Yeah. The New Order.
The
Nightwing,
New Order.
New Order.
So I mean, you growing up being a big Nightwing fan, and
Yeah, you know
we're
what?
gonna have you sign these.
Sure. What's cool and what's kind of funny about this book is that I did 3 years on Nightwing on the main series, and it was a really tough book. And like I've said before, it was a really tough time to write at DC. And I never felt, with the exception of a handful of issues, I was never happy with any of the stuff I did on Nightwing. It wasn't fun. And
I loved it. So I mean,
I appreciate
as a
that.
fan, it was. I've told you this numerous times, but you were one of my favorite books when the New 52 came out.
It was kind of like I don't know. I look back on it now, and I've kind of come to terms with it more in that it's like, okay, well, I got the keys to my favorite car, but unfortunately, you know, it just wasn't the weather, the road conditions weren't ideal, you know. But I did get to drive my favorite car. And rather than, at a certain point, I had to just kind of let go and think of it differently and realize, like, rather than think about, like, what I could do for Dick Grayson and the stamp I could leave on him, I started thinking about it, like, well, what Dick Grayson can do for me. Because the character's going to be around for long after I'm done. And he's a fantastic character, and you can't break him, you know? Mm-hmm. So he taught me how to be a better writer. He taught me how to work within Big Two Comics on a monthly series. He taught me how to do long-form story arcs. He taught me how to work with and sometimes around notes. And he definitely made me a much better writer. Having said that, when I left the book, and then the book was canceled, I left because the book was canceled. I mean, basically, they canceled the book, which, is why I stopped writing it, because there was no more book.
Yeah.
Because of events in Forever Evil. I, through a series of different conversations and different kind of other projects, how do I phrase this? Or how do I put this? I don't even remember the exact circumstances, but I came to be aware, Dan DiDio told me at one point they were looking for kind of like the next, like, Superman Red Sun. Like, he wanted to do, like, an Elseworlds kind of story. Not Elseworlds exactly, like, they weren't going to bring that name back, but, like, do an Elseworlds type story. And so I was like, I want to do that, So I was thinking about stuff, and I had done 40 issues of Batman Beyond 2.0 with Alex Antone, who's one of my favorite editors and a very good friend. And it was going to be putting these projects together was going to be kind of in his jurisdiction. And so I remember one day I was, like, thinking of different stuff and different ideas. And the low-hanging fruit idea that was just sitting there for me was, like, doing some sort of, like, almost kind of like Dark Knight Returns for Nightwing. And I asked him, I was like, is this stupid? Like, is that such a low-hanging fruit idea? Like,
no one's done it.
Yeah, but, like, I wrote Nightwing, but now I'm going to do, like, can I just, it's like, God, can Higgins not do anything? Can he do something other than Nightwing, for God's sake?
But you love it. I mean, it's...
But I do. And we both agreed, like, it needed something else, And so I built out this whole world and this premise that in a lot of ways is kind of an allegory about gun violence and control and things like that. But ultimately not really, because there's human...
character moment.
Well, there's like big moral questions that don't map one-to-one as an allegory, like the powers that you're trying to outlaw are tied to human beings. So it's not the same thing, but the starting point is similar. Proliferation of these powers and ultimately the powers go away. And it's tied to something that Dick Grayson did and how Dick Grayson's Nightwing basically saved the world. And so I built out this whole thing and got it approved. And got the artist that I was dying to work with since my time at on Gates of Gotham, Trevor McCarthy. We hadn't done interiors together since Gates of Gotham, which was basic. And he did the Night Runner story, so the very first thing I did at DC. And it kind of turned into this, like, perfect little book. And I'm so immensely proud of it. It's 6 issues. Trevor, Dean White, Clayton Cowles, and I did all 6 issues. Wow. There's no fill-ins. It's the first time Trevor has done a whole miniseries like that in a long time. And it's going to be in trade, forever.
Yeah.
And so it's really it's really cool and cathartic. And if it's the last thing I do at DC, like, I feel very much at peace of, like...
I told the story I wanted to tell.
It's like, I'm good. I got to do something that I'm super, super proud of, that I think is really good, on my all-time favorite character, and, like...
Let that be that.
I'm good, yeah.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone out there wants to get signed copies of Power Rangers Volume 1, Volume 2, mm-hmm. issue number 27, share the book. Wanted to thank... I had one last question for you. Mm-hmm. What advice do you have out there for any aspiring creators, writers, artists? Like, what advice would you tell them to kind of break into comics?
Well, I mean, artists... I think artists have a little bit of an easier path because they can actually show samples. Writers, no one wants to see your samples. So you have to make comics. You have to find an artist... or be an artist yourself, I guess, and actually produce work. and either self-publish it through the web or bring it to conventions and talk to publishers, etc. I mean, your question is like, it's really, there's two sides to it. The first is how, like, I have advice from a craft standpoint about how to actually grow as a writer for comics and learn how to write for the medium. But the other side of it is like, well, how do you get your stuff published? How do you get noticed? And so they're actually two different questions. And from a how to get the stuff published standpoint, I think you have to start by doing it yourself. You have to start making stuff and putting it out into the world. I say this a lot, but I truly believe it to be accurate. There's no such thing as undiscovered genius in 2018. The world is too small and too interconnected. And if you do good stuff, it will get seen. You know, even if you do good stuff and you put it out and you have a social media presence and you're putting it online or on a Tumblr or blog, whatever, like, interact with other creators, you know? Like, I can't tell you how many times, like, somebody tweets at me and I click on their profile and it's like, oh, they're a writer, they're an artist, they're a creator. And I'll flip through like pages that they've done. Yeah. And you can tell if stuff's at a high kind of production value, production quality, like, you can tell. That's the stuff I take seriously, you know? So there's that side of it. From a craft standpoint, if you're putting together like an ash can, which is like a sample to show, or your own stuff to put online, hire a letterer. Hire a professional letterer. Troy Pateri letters a lot of my stuff. He's available. Letterers aren't that expensive.
And they make a huge difference. They make it look from
non-professional to cannot even put into words how important it is. Whenever someone hands me something like an ash can or like their own book, I flip it open and I can tell within 10 seconds whether I'm going to take it seriously or not. And the lettering is the first thing I look at. I don't want canned fonts. I don't want, perfectly symmetrical balloons. I don't want typefaces that are not... There's a style and an art to lettering, as well as how it leads your eye around the page. And color is the other big thing. Coloring. That's the other thing I notice within 5 to 10 seconds. I can tell, like, oh, is this something at a certain level? From a writing standpoint, I think I heard Matt Fraction give this advice years ago, but I think it's great, and I did this. Take your favorite book, take a book you love, you think is great, and write a reverse script for it. So what I mean by that is, like, literally go on a comic book script archive, find a different script sample that in a format that you like. They're all different. We all write in a different kind of style or format. But basically start writing, okay, page 1, meaning like one page of art. What's the script that you would write so an artist would get that? An artist would draw this. Now, I don't mean write every single detail of like as if you were describing this as panel as a grid. Like, it's a shot looking up at a statue where it's on the right side of frame. Like, no, you don't want that level of like detail. Weird specificity. But you would say something like, establishing shot, night, a statue of Joseph Stalin stands in the center of a town or something like that. Light snowfall, and then actually write out the captions. Caption November 1991, and then caption in the winter of 1991, the writing was on the wall. Caption 2, the Soviet Union would be coming to an end. Do that, and then move on to panel 2. A man emerges in shadow from a river, backlit by the moon. Something like that. Write out the caption text, and what starts to happen. Do that for the whole issue. And it's like jazz. It's like transcribing a Charlie Parker solo. If you take a Charlie Parker solo and you start writing, you listen to it a million times and you write every single note he plays, what you start to see is the method behind the madness. You start to see the secrets. You see, oh, that little lick he played, that's the same lick he plays over here. It's just raised half a step because of the chord change, but he's playing that pattern because this is the same chord change pattern, just in a different key, right? Same thing in comics. Oh, that much text fits in that panel. Oh, more than this wouldn't fit. Oh, 3-word balloons make sense here. Oh, it's a 5-panel page. Oh, oh, the page turn is where they do this reveal rather than having it on the bottom of the page. Things like that. So you start to get into the nuances and the intricacies of how something like this is put together.
Yeah. And I think that goes a long way when you're trying to discover how to tell stories and do that. And I know you've done that when you were first getting into comics.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember hearing you talk about it before and just kind of breaking down stories. And that's the...
Well, yeah, because, I mean, there are a lot of people who think writing a comic is the same as writing a screenplay or writing a movie, and they're not, you know? And there are a lot of people, like, I can't tell you, especially being in LA, like, I have a variation on the... hey, I'm a screenwriter who has a pilot and I want to make it as a graphic novel, basically to proof out the IP. I have a variation of that conversation probably once a month.
Yeah.
You know, they're not the same thing. Like, respect the medium you're writing for. Learn how that medium works and why it works and what you can do in that medium, and then break the rules.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's because comics is a passion of mine. And just wanted to thank our crew today, Ramon, JJ, Flotron, and Hannah for being here. And Victoria as well. And we wanted to just wanted to invite you to like the page, Dreamer Comics Podcast. So if you see it, if you're watching this video, you can click the link, follow the page, go check it out. Reminder, make sure to go pick up issue number 27 of Power Rangers and go back, pick up the original stuff if you haven't read it. And of course, make sure to pick up Kyle's new book, The Dead Hand, which actually issue 2 just came out on Wednesday. So pick it up. I love it, and I know you'll love it.
And that's it. Until next time.
Until next time, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Dreamer Comics Podcast. I'm Omar Spahi with Kyle Higgins.
Take care.